I felt like I had to write a song, let's try to have capitalism with a conscience, you know what I mean?
Ever wonder which bands Bob Seger couldn't stand? Yeah, the guy behind classics like Night Moves and old-time rock and roll wasn't exactly everyone's biggest fan. In fact, he had some pretty strong opinions about certain bands that might surprise you. Why did Seger dislike them so much? What was it about their music, attitude, or success that rubbed him the wrong way? Let's jump right into the top 6 bands Bob Seger hated the most, starting off at number 6. The Eagles. Now, on paper, you might assume Bob Seger and the Eagles would see eye to eye. After all, both are rock royalty with roots planted firmly in the 70s, both known for their storytelling lyrics, catchy guitar riffs, and massive hits that still echo through classic rock radio. But despite all that, Seger didn't hold back his criticism of the band's sound and style, and it's pretty clear he wasn't shy about it. Seger felt the Eagles' music was just too polished, too smooth, too calculated. They had this picture-perfect harmony and production that to Seger made their songs feel almost sterile, like they'd been scrubbed clean of any real grit or soul, and that was a huge problem for him. See, Seger's music comes from a different place, a raw, honest, working-class vibe that's full of life's imperfections. His sound is rough around the edges, emotional and deeply human. The Eagles, by comparison, felt a little too manufactured, too glossy. It's the difference between a live, sweaty bar show and a perfectly produced studio track. Take Hotel California, for example. It's iconic, sure, beautiful guitars, memorable lyrics, haunting melodies. But Seger might tell you that beneath the polish, something's missing. The emotional punch, the kind of storytelling that hits you in the gut, that raw, lived-in feeling that can only come from music that's breathed and bled. According to Seger, the Eagles' smooth harmonies don't quite reach that level of soulfulness. But it wasn't just the sound. Seger was also critical of their image. He saw the Eagles as a band that leaned heavily into commercial appeal, slick, put together, and market-ready. It felt less like genuine artistry and more like a carefully crafted product designed to sell millions of records. For Seger, that kind of packaging took away from the authenticity he valued so deeply. It was like the band was polished to perfection on the outside, but missing the rawness and imperfection that make music truly connect. So what was behind Seger's disdain? Was it jealousy over their success, artistic differences, or maybe something more personal? It's hard to say for sure. But one thing's clear, Seger's definition of rock music was rooted in heart, grit, and soul, and the Eagles' slick style just didn't fit into that picture. At the end of the day, it reminds us something important. Music is deeply personal. What resonates with one artist or listener might fall flat for another. And for Bob Seger, the Eagles were a prime example of music that missed the emotional mark. Coming in at number 5, Journey. Now, Journey's reputation is huge. Those soaring vocals, those unforgettable power ballads like Don't Stop Believin', and the kind of arena rock anthems that fill stadiums and get thousands of fans singing along in perfect harmony. They defined a big part of 80s rock, and their influence is undeniable. But when it came to Journey, Bob Seger wasn't exactly their biggest fan, and for reasons that might surprise you. Seger saw Journey's music as overly dramatic, almost theatrical, and that was a big turnoff for him. Their songs were polished to a shine, loaded with epic guitar solos and vocal runs that, while impressive, felt a bit too rehearsed and grandiose. To Seger, it sometimes seemed like Journey was aiming more for spectacle than substance, trying hard to fill arenas with flashy hooks and bombastic sound rather than delivering the kind of honest, gritty rock music he stood for. Think about it. Seger's whole approach to music is grounded in authenticity. His songs come from real life, real struggles, and real stories. They're stripped down, raw, and heartfelt. Journey, by contrast, represented a style of rock that was slick and showy, designed to impress crowds with grandeur rather than move them with raw emotion. But does that mean Seger hated all big arena rock? Not necessarily. It's more about the disconnect between what he valued, honest storytelling and emotional grit, and what Journey put on the table, soaring melodies and polished performances that sometimes felt like they were trying a little too hard to be the soundtrack for an epic light show. Seger's criticism wasn't just about the sound, It was about the vibe, the feeling you get when you listen to a song that feels real versus one that feels engineered. Journey's music, while undeniably catchy and uplifting, didn't quite match the heart-on-your-sleeve approach that Seger championed. So why bring this up? Because it shows us how, even within the same genre, artists have very different definitions of what makes music real. For Seger, Journey's anthems missed that mark. They were more about style than substance, and that's a distinction that matters when you're talking about the soul of rock music. Have you ever heard a song that sounds amazing but somehow doesn't move you emotionally? That's the kind of disconnect Seger was talking about. Journey might fill arenas, but Seger wanted his music to fill hearts. Number 4 on the list, the Bee Gees. Now this might catch some people off guard. After all, the Bee Gees are disco royalty, those unmistakable falsetto harmonies, the funky grooves, and of course their role in defining the disco era with hits like Stayin' Alive and Night Fever. But for Bob Seger, who's more rooted in gritty rock and soul, the Bee Gees were not exactly his cup of tea. In fact, he had some strong opinions about them. Seger's dislike for the Bee Gees wasn't just a simple matter of genre difference. It went deeper than that. To him, the Bee Gees symbolized a shift in the 70s music scene that he found troubling, a move away from rock's emotional depth and authenticity towards something more focused on surface-level appeal and dance floor gimmicks. The falsetto-heavy vocals and disco beats, while catchy and wildly popular, felt like a betrayal of the raw, heartfelt spirit that Seger admired in rock music. What really irked Seger was the sense that the Bee Gees represented the selling-out culture. Their music wasn't about storytelling or emotional truth. It was about chasing trends, riding the wave of whatever was hot on the charts, and packaging songs for maximum commercial success. For Seger, that kind of music missed the point of what music should be. He believed music should connect, move, and tell a story, not just get people dancing. This tension between commercial success and artistic authenticity is a story as old as the music industry itself. Seger's critique of the Bee Gees taps into that bigger debate. Can an artist remain true to their roots while also embracing popular trends? Seger clearly thought the Bee Gees had tilted too far toward the latter. But was this critique purely musical? Or was it also about what the Bee Gees represented in the cultural landscape of the 70s? Disco was huge, but it also came with backlash. A lot of rock fans saw it as shallow or gimmicky. For Seger, the Bee Gees weren't just making a different kind of music. They symbolized a broader shift in the industry that he didn't agree with. Of course, the Bee Gees' impact is undeniable. They brought joy and dance floor energy to millions, and their talent is unquestionable. But from Seger's perspective, their style was just too far removed from the emotional, soul-driven rock that he lived and breathed. So the next time you hear that falsetto or feel the beat of a classic disco track, remember, there was one rock legend who heard something very different behind the music. At number 3, the Rolling Stones. Now this might sound like a surprise to some. After all, the Stones and Bob Seger. Both rock legends, both icons of their era, often mentioned in the same breath when you talk about classic rock. You'd think there'd be mutual respect all around. And there was, in a way. But Seger didn't hold back when it came to calling out some of what he saw as the excesses that came with the Stones' legacy. Seger absolutely respected their influence. The Rolling Stones practically rewrote the rules of rock and roll. They brought a rebellious, raw energy that shaped generations. But at the same time, Seger was critical of the ego and wild lifestyles that sometimes took center stage, overshadowing the music itself. For Seger, rock wasn't just about image or attitude. It was about authenticity and connection, the kind that comes from lived experience, not just playing a role. Seger's own approach to music was much more grounded. He wasn't about the big rock star antics or the scandal headlines. His focus was on telling stories that felt real, songs that connected with everyday people, and that's where he saw a disconnect with the Stones. They'd gotten caught up in the spectacle, the larger-than-life image, the constant hype, the bad boy persona that sometimes seemed to define them more than their music. But was this just a clash of values? Maybe it was also a generational difference. The Stones came up in a wild time, where rebellion was a badge of honor and excess was almost expected. Seger, while rebellious in his own way, leaned more toward humility and the working-class ethos, valuing sincerity over showmanship. Still, Seger could separate the art from the artist. He admired the Stones' craft, their songwriting, their ability to move crowds, their undeniable impact on rock history. Yet he wasn't afraid to voice frustration with the way their persona sometimes got in the way of the music's heart. It's an interesting dynamic. Can you respect someone's talent while being critical of their image? For Seger, the answer was yes. It speaks to a deeper conversation about what rock music is really about. Is it about the spectacle and the swagger, or is it about the stories and the soul? So next time you crank up a Rolling Stones track, think about the complexity behind the legend. How even fellow rock icons like Bob Seger saw both the brilliance and the baggage. Number 2 on the list, Aerosmith. These guys are rock royalty, swaggering onto the stage with big hits, unforgettable riffs, and a raw energy that's defined them for decades. From Dream On to Walk This Way, Aerosmith has shaped rock history in a huge way. But when it comes to Bob Seger, the relationship with Aerosmith wasn't exactly all smiles and mutual admiration. Seger certainly acknowledged their talent. You can't deny the chops, Steven Tyler's vocal range, Joe Perry's guitar work, the band's ability to craft songs that became anthems for a generation. But beneath that admiration, Seger wasn't shy about pointing out what he saw as their poser moments. What do we mean by poser? For Seger, Aerosmith sometimes seemed to rely too much on image and theatrics, those larger-than-life stage antics and showmanship that looked more like performance than pure rock and roll. It's like Seger was watching a band that, while talented, occasionally got caught up in style over substance. Seger's own music has always been grounded in storytelling, real-life stories filled with grit, heart, and soul. He prized that rawness, that honesty that makes you feel like you're hearing the artist's own truth. So when Aerosmith leaned into their rock star persona with all the swagger and flair, it clashed with what Seger valued most. Was this just a difference in style, or was there something more personal behind the scenes? After all, both Aerosmith and Seger were major players in the rock world, often crossing paths in tours and events. There's always a bit of competition when two giants share the same space. Sometimes, what looks like criticism can be a reflection of that rivalry. But here's the interesting part. Despite these tensions, there's also respect. Seger wasn't dismissing Aerosmith's legacy. He just wished they'd keep it a bit more real, a bit less glossy, a bit closer to the heart of rock. This dynamic between Seger and Aerosmith shows us a classic rock story, the balance between persona and authenticity. It raises a question for all artists. How much do you lean into the spectacle? And how much do you hold on to the raw emotional core that connects you to your fans? So when you see Aerosmith strut on stage with their signature swagger, remember there's a legend like Bob Seger who admired the music but questioned the mask. That tension adds layers to the story of rock itself. And finally, the band Bob Seger hated the most, Styx. Now this might raise some eyebrows because Styx has had their fair share of hits, blending progressive rock with arena anthems that filled stadiums in the 70s and 80s. Songs like Come Sail Away and Renegade are classics in their own right, with soaring vocals and epic musical moments. But for Seger, Styx represented everything he disliked about the rock scene that moved away from raw, heartfelt storytelling. Seger didn't hold back when it came to his opinion on Styx. He famously called their music pretentious and overproduced, words that cut deep when you're talking about rock music, a genre built on raw energy and genuine emotion. To Seger, Styx's theatrical style felt more like a rock opera on steroids, grandiose, elaborate, and often missing the point of honest, soul-driven music. He saw Styx as more about spectacle than substance. Their elaborate stage shows, layered production, and conceptual albums were all flashy, but Seger felt they sacrificed the core of what rock music was supposed to be. For him, rock was about grit, real stories, and connection to everyday life. Styx's polished, sometimes bombastic approach clashed hard with that ethos. Was this just a case of different musical tastes? Maybe, but some say there was more to it. Personal rivalry and history may have added fuel to the fire. Both Seger and Styx were competing for attention in a rapidly changing music industry, and that competition sometimes breeds tough opinions. Seger's blunt criticism might have been as much about protecting his own vision of rock as it was about disliking Styx's style. But what does all this really tell us? Bob Seger's list of bands he hated isn't just about who made music he didn't like. It's a window into what mattered most to him: authenticity, connection, and staying true to the soul of rock. He championed music that came from experience, raw and real, and he pushed back hard against what he saw as slick, overproduced, or overly commercialized. Seger's opinions remind us that even legends have their hot takes, and those opinions can be surprising, sometimes controversial, but always rooted in a deep love for music as an art form. So what do you think? Did any of these bands really deserve Seger's criticism, or was he being too harsh? Did you expect Styx to top the list? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into rock's less talked about rivalries and opinions, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from the heart of rock and roll.